Sean Owen from SRAM, who is joining us, and he'll be leading the presentation today. So we're excited to have him. He is the technical field guide for the Southeast, and he's done a few of these. So I think that this will be really valuable for everyone. I want to start out today by thanking all of you for attending. We really appreciate you, and we appreciate your partnership, and we're stoked that you're making this investment in your business to be here. Also wanted to thank SRAM. I think they have a great history of standing shoulder to shoulder with bike shops and doing everything that they can to support, and they do a lot to support us. So we really appreciate them and the time that they're putting in. And really, that's why we're all here. We have a shared interest in seeing bike shops excel and do well into the future. We really appreciate you. We view you as the lifeblood of the bike industry, and it's really critical for all of us to be successful, that you're successful and that you're profitable. And I think that that's really the main thing that we want to cover here today, is making sure that everyone has a recipe, that their service center is also a profit center. And I kind of like hope that we'll get three things from this. First is additional revenue stream for your stores. Second is ultimately a better user experience for all of your customers, because nothing rides as good as freshly serviced suspension. And we also want to make sure that each of you are establishing your stores as market leaders. I have a corny saying that I say a lot. Sales department sells the first bike, but the service department sells every bike after that. So you bringing them back in the door is going to pay dividends for years to come. So yeah, as we mentioned, we'll do some Q&A along the way. Please make sure that you stick around to the end of the meeting, and there will be some discount codes for RockShox on addition to what we're already doing. And yeah, I'll shut up and let Sean Owen take it away and sit here and learn something. So thank you, Sean.
All right, Matt, thanks for the intro, and HLC, thanks for pulling this together, and all of you, thanks for showing up and attending here. I'm going to get my PowerPoint kind of pulled up here. I promise I'm not going to run this whole thing on slides. I'm not huge on the PowerPoint thing myself, but I do think it helps us illustrate some kind of key visual things. And again, thanks again for taking some time. If I'm showing the wrong thing on camera at some point, or you can't hear me, let me know pretty quickly, and we'll try and get that remedied. I just want to make sure everyone has a smooth experience and gets the most out of this. All right, so taking a look here at our kind of presentation, our goal here is we're going to talk about how to make suspension service a key piece of your service business. That's really our overriding goal. And before we get into that, just introduce myself. Again, as Matt said, my name is Sean Owen. I'm a technical field guide for SRAM based in the Southeast. I'm based in Bentonville, Arkansas, and you can see kind of our map of where our technical field guides are located. We got Doug Dalton in the Southwest, Troy Laffey in the Northwest, Brian Vanderbosch in the Midwest and Northeast, and now we have Mathieu joining us in Canada. So that's where our technical field guides are. And just if you haven't interacted with us before, our role is in-market technical experts. We still got that 1-800 number and the warranty portal for things like that. What we do is we deliver education, and we're really focused on the technical side of the product and growing your service department. So kind of us in a nutshell. And so again, when we start talking about suspension service, we need to think about, is this right for your business? And you need to ask yourself some kind of key questions here. Who should be doing suspension service? And the kind of broad overview to look at it is, if you've got $3,000 plus mountain bikes going out your door, you need to think about how many of those are going out your door. How many of those are you seeing back for service annually? And that's going to give you a good indication if your market and if your customer base has this need. And then look at your market specifically, right? Where is suspension happening in your market? Do you have a competitor who's offering this service? Or is this stuff that just simply has to go out to get taken care of? Is there a void in your market and a real opportunity for you to come in there and capture some of that business? And what do your riders need? And if you've got a bunch of yeses coming up with those questions, we're probably going down the right track. And so the next thing I want to think about before we talk about piloting a new initiative for our business is we want to think about, what are the barriers that we're going to run into? You can have all the best intentions, and if you run into these barriers and you don't have a good answer, that suspension service business is not going to be successful. So based on what I've seen in my years in the service business and based on what I hear from retailers, these are kind of the key barriers that we kind of hear out there. Is we've got a technician skills and experience gap. Maybe we don't have the physical space or the money to invest in tooling to support suspension service. We don't do enough of it to be efficient and profitable. Or our service department's just too busy with other work to add additional services. And then, some of the practical hurdles are it's too hard to identify and stock the parts to support it. And it's just hard to sell to riders. Riders are reluctant to pay for suspension service. And so those are kind of the key barriers that I think of. If you've got some more, feel free to drop those in the chat. We can try and address those. But I'd like to kind of work our way through this list and come up with some answers for these hurdles and some strategies we can use to help implement that suspension service business. And so this picture, I think, does a lot to encapsulate some of those hesitations we feel when we think about adding suspension service, right? What we're looking at is the piston for a Sidlux A2. And we can see we've got a lot of, small parts in proper orientation. We've got a lot of technical sophistication here. And modern suspension is complex, absolutely. Modern mountain bikes can do some incredible things, and suspension technology is really part of the key. And this complex, technology can be seen in this view. And then one of our other hurdles we think about is I think about my service department, right? I've only got X amount of space to work with. And if you're in, a high rent area, you probably have even less space to work with. And when we think about a suspension service bench, we probably think of something looking like this, right? We've got a dedicated purpose-built suspension bench here. We've got a sink. We've got a drainage solution. We've got a dyno. We've got some expensive tools and a pretty sophisticated footprint. We can sometimes look at this and think, I don't have room for this in my business. And this, just to give you some context, this is one of our suspension service benches in our Indianapolis facility. When you send that product in, this is where that team is working on it. And so here, hopefully this isn't new or familiar to anyone. This is our SRAM RockShox service interval chart. It's regularly updated as we release new products or change service instructions. And what you kind of see here is from left to right. We've got a 50-hour interval, a 100-hour interval, 200, 300, 400, 600, and then under the 365 days, we've got our brake product. And so you don't see every single product represented under every one of these categories or every one of these intervals, but what you'll see is, for example, we take a look at the Lyric. We'll see that the Lyric shows up under 50 hours as well as 200 hours. So there are two different service procedures for that fork. At that 50-hour interval, when I take a look underneath, I'm going to see lower leg service is what's spilled out there. And we'll take a closer look at this in a more zoomed-in fashion in just a bit. So at 50 hours, I'm going to do a lower leg service on that Lyric, meaning I'm going to drop the lowers. We're going to clean it, get all that bad stuff that's accumulated over 50 hours of riding out. We're going to put fresh oil in there and put it back together again. So more or less an oil change for our fork. And then we're going to get to our second 50 hours, and we're going to do that same procedure. We're going to get to our third 50 hours and do that same procedure once more. But when we get to the fourth 50 hours, we're at 200 hours, and we're going to move to that 200-hour interval. And what we're going to do is that same oil change, but if we look here, we're also going to do a full damper service as well as an air spring service. So we're going to do a complete tear down and overhaul of that fork. So what does this all mean? What should be our takeaway here? Well, the kind of idea I want to present to you, and if you're going to walk away with kind of one thing coming out of this, is this message. You don't have to do everything right away or ever. We'd love for you to get to that point if you want to get to that point, and we want to help you along the way there. But if we're just getting started, or maybe we dove in both feet first and didn't have great success in the past, what I want to do is I want to narrow our scope of focus. I want to just talk about 50-hour service. Those 50-hour services, those are really important to make sure that we're preventing long-term damage to that fork. They are required to make that fork meet its warranty, right? Technically, we won't honor the warranty if the fork hasn't seen those services. And the bike needs a fair amount of them. 50 hours is something a normal rider could accumulate in 3 months, 6 months, and certainly a year. So it's something that we have a lot of need for in our market. And if our suspension product is currently going out to get serviced, if you send something in to us, we're not doing a 50-hour service. If you take the time to send that product into us, we're going to do the full 200-hour service. So that 50-hour service is not something that we're offering in-house, and most other in-house suspension centers are not doing that 50-hour service, which makes it a great opportunity for you to capture that within your market. And so that's really the main point here, is we're going to have a super narrow focus on that 50-hour service. We're going to build efficiency, confidence, and most importantly, we're going to get riders accustomed to the idea of preventative maintenance, which is one of the hurdles we come up against when we're trying to sell suspension service. And so let's think about those hurdles again. That first hurdle I identified is we've got a technical skills gap. So how are we going to overcome a technical skills gap? Well, I mentioned we've got a technical field guide team. I've got 4 counterparts that are spread throughout the country, or in Canada as well. We each work out of these video studios. We're available for one-on-one video calls for technical training to get you skilled up on those 50-hour procedures. So that's one option. We've got SRAM Technical University, our online library of product as well as technical training videos. We've got our 50-hour procedures underneath that umbrella. So you've got free online access to that. And if you don't have an account, it's fairly easy to get you set up with one. And then we're also back to offering STU in person in both our Colorado Springs and Indianapolis facility. Tuition is $400 per class. We offer 3 different tiers of classes depending on where you are in your suspension service knowledge journey. In addition to that $400 tuition, you'd be responsible for transportation and lodging, but again, a highly focused classroom environment to learn those skills. So 3 different avenues for you to build up that skill. And then again, we identified the physical space constraints as one of the hurdles. You know, we showed you kind of a dream space there and what we use in our suspension service facility in Indianapolis, but we can build a suspension service area in our already crowded workspace using a fairly small footprint here. This is kind of a really condensed example. What we need is a vise. We need some way to catch the oil. We could get some, solution from Walmart's automotive area or whatever your local hardware store is for dealing with oil. And we need some way to clamp that bike or clamp the fork if we're doing the fork off the bike. So pretty modest footprint here. And we're going to take a look at the tooling in just a bit. If we got a little more space in our service department, again, we can build out a little more spacious, a little nicer. Or we can, go a little bigger. It's really what your space has the space to justify, but I do want to show you that there's a variety of solutions available to us in terms of setting up our suspension bench. I'm going to kill my camera here, or it's not kill my camera, but kill my presentation, and we'll walk through some of those resources. I'm going to just pause here, see if we got anything going on in the chat or the questions. And I'll drink a little water. All right, let's keep charging along here and covering this, shuffling some things around on my screen. We're talking about how are we going to overcome some of these barriers. All right, pulling up my screen. Apologies. Bear with me. All right, excellent. All right, so we talked about how we're going to overcome the technical knowledge barrier. We've got a good solution there. We talked about the physical space constraint. And I think we provided that there are some easy solutions available to us. So let's work our way through that rest of some of those barriers that we're going to run into. All right, so the next barrier that we're going to run into is we don't do enough of that service to be efficient and profitable. And this really goes back to my point of let's drop our focus on trying to do everything and let's just focus on those 50 hours. And we're going to limit our focus on that for a couple reasons. One, that 50-hour fork procedure, and we can take a look on my wall. I've got, pretty much the whole lineup, the Signature Series right now. The 50-hour service procedure I'm going to do on one of those forks is nearly identical to the 50-hour service procedure I'm going to do on any of those forks. And what that means is that once I've got that procedure down and do it a few times, I'm going to build efficiency, I'm going to build confidence, and I'm going to start working a lot more profitably on that particular service procedure. Really, the only difference is going to be how much oil and what type of oil. And we're going to talk about how to easily identify those when we get a little deeper in here. And for our rear shock procedure, there's a little bit of variety, a little bit more than the forks, but pretty condensed. By focusing just on 50-hour services, we're going to do a lot of those services. We're going to do them over and over again. And we're going to build some efficiency. We're going to build some confidence. What I'm really looking to do, and if we get to this point, this is great. I really want to get to the point where I can actually batch my suspension work. I can make Tuesdays my suspension day in my service department, which is going to minimize setup time. It's going to minimize cleanup time. I'm going to have my dedicated suspension technician come in and just knock them out back to back to back. And that's really where the efficiency gains are going to come from. And that's our goal state with this focus. All right, so that's our efficiency barrier we're talking about. The other thing is that, you know, my service department is the profit center of my store. My service department can get pretty busy. My turnaround times can really get long. I might feel like I don't have the time to budget my bandwidth for other services like adding suspension service. But let's break down some of the math here. So a practice technician can do a fork service, lower leg service in about 30 minutes or less. A rear shock is going to take that time or even less depending on how hard it is to remove it from the bike. Some bikes are a little easier to pull than others. And pricing for 50-hour service is going to vary widely, right? You see that I cover Miami as well as Norman, Oklahoma. So I've got a pretty good range in my market. I'm going to see anywhere from 50 to 125 for a 50-hour service. The average is probably landing around $75. That rear shock service kit, that 50-hour kit, we're looking at about a cost of around $30 for those parts at a $55 MSRP. And if I was to do a fork wiper seal upgrade kit, the wholesale is around $19 and MSRP is around $30. So that means if we were to do a 50-hour service front and rear on a full suspension bike at $75, we'd be generating $150 in labor on that ticket, as well as $85 in parts. And what we're talking about is we're talking about less than an hour's work for that complete bike. And the question we need to ask ourselves is are the services we're worried about displacing giving us that kind of ticket add-on, that kind of margin? Suspension can be a really profitable part of our business, especially if it's something that we're not seeing offered elsewhere in our market, if our competitors are not doing it. We've got an unmet need in our market, and we've got a real opportunity. And anything we can do to boost up that service department has an outsized impact on the rest of the store. All right. Check in again for any questions. You guys are quiet. It must be Friday afternoon, huh? All right. No worries. Let's talk about the kind of the elephant in the room. And that really is that suspension service can be challenging to sell. And it can be challenging to sell for sort of two reasons. One, we're coming up against the problems that the rider has with spending for the service. And two, we're coming up with our own kind of barriers to being able to find the information we need efficiently. We'll split that up into kind of two parts. I want to focus on the rider first. And so when I'm doing my service advising with that rider, one of the questions I like to lead with is I like to say, when was your last suspension service? And in most cases, in a market with an unmet need, riders are going to say to themselves, if they don't say it out loud, I need to do that. I've never done that, or I didn't know I need to do that. And so the piece we're going to pull ourselves back to here is we've got that RockShox service interval chart. In the bottom right-hand corner of that chart, we've got some little text that's basically letting them know that service is important to maintaining the proper function, as well as to keeping their warranty in effect. So we're using that manufacturer's recommendation as a lever to help drive that recommendation. We're having that conversation. And we can even use that as a service counter. But we also want to have some physical things we can show on the bike, right? Suspension can be a little bit of a black box, pun intended, right? So riders don't see the problem. Everything's kind of hidden inside the lowers of that fork. So we've got our fork. I've been out there riding it for 100 hours. I'm well past my 50-hour interval. I might feel like I don't notice that there's a problem. What are we able to do to show this rider that we've got a physical need to do this? And one of the things I like to do, let me switch my camera here so I'm a little, you guys seeing me big enough to see? All right,
You're looking great, Sean.
Awesome, thank you so much. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stand up out of my chair. I'm going to cycle my suspension. And then we're going to switch to a closer camera on here. Let me switch my camera here. Whoa, didn't mean to turn it off. And we'll switch on over to this camera and popping on over here. Let me see if I can get that on camera for you. So we'll cycle my suspension. And this is a suspension no one's ridden. And what we've got when I cycle my suspension is we can see some residual oil marks. We can see kind of a ring of oil where I compress that to. If I was to walk up to my rider's bike who hasn't serviced their suspension in several hundred hours, and we were to cycle it, this is going to come back dry. And so we've got a visible thing we can demonstrate, and we can show them a comparison if we've got a fork on our wall, or I'm sure you've got a new bike on your floor. You could walk over, cycle the suspension in the front and the rear, and you can show them that residual oil. What's essentially happening is as that rider's riding, cycling that suspension, a little bit of oil is exiting as that suspension cycles, and it'll evaporate and get cleaned off over the course of use. You lose a little bit of oil each of those rides. After 100 hours of riding, 50 hours of riding, you're going to see very, very little oil coming out of there. And we're going to realize that that oil that used to be down here lubricating my lowers, keeping everything moving smoothly, is no longer down there. And we can be doing damage. We're fighting against that friction. So that's going to be a nice visual thing we can look at. And just as much on the front as in the rear, but in the rear it's going to be a little more visible because we're riding that bike and the rear is a little more exposed to dirt and debris. When that bike comes in for service, they're obviously not cleaning it up before they bring it in for service. We're probably going to have a ring of pine needles and dirt and debris and all kinds of other stuff stuck around that wiper seal. I can point to that to the rider and say that as that suspension component cycles, some of that dirt is making its way inside and has made its way inside over the 50 hours that you've been riding. What we need to do is we need to remove this air can, clean out that debris so it doesn't scratch anything or cause more permanent damage, and get things lubricated so it's moving smoothly again. And that's really what we're going to be looking for as quick visual things. Switching my camera on over here. All right, little lag as those cameras switch over. So having some go-to visual things that we can show to the rider kind of gives that aha moment. Because really what we are up against here with our riders is they're not remembering what that bike felt like when it was brand new. They're remembering that last ride. And so we have to overcome that, degradation and gradual performance and get them to understand how much better things felt when it was new. And it can feel like we're pushing a rock uphill for sure. And so another strategy we can do in addition to that is our service packages. You take a look at your service package menu. A question you need to ask yourself if you're serious about suspension service is, are we differentiating between road bikes and mountain bikes? I would advocate that if you're really trying to push suspension service and make it a part of your business, your go-to annual suspension service pack or your go-to annual mountain bike service package should include a front and rear suspension service. Bundling those 50-hour services in there can have some advantages in that we're not ending up with a work order with a bunch of different lines. You're presenting the case of you have a high-end performance mountain bike, and this is the maintenance that's required to keep that high-end mountain bike moving and working properly. So thinking about how your service packages look correctly. And another thing I like to do in regards to service is I like to think about other kind of preventative maintenances that happen throughout the season that are more likely to draw a rider in through the door. So sealant in tires is a great analogy. I know that if I don't refresh the sealant in my tires every 3 months, I'm going to find myself slashing a tire and not having any sealant in there because it's going to have dried up in about 3 months. So when someone comes in for, a new tire and you open that tire up and there's no sealant inside that tire, you should be thinking inside your head, it's probably been that long since they've done their suspension service. I find those are two nice kind of parallel tracks, suggesting that 50-hour service at the same time as the sealant refresh. And then the other thing I want to do is I want to mine my point of sale system. Who did I sell a high-end mountain bike to 6 months ago, 12 months ago? Do they, have they had suspension service? Let's get them back in the door and do that. So digging through there. And then the other thing I want to do is I want to use my social media reach with my customers to do a little education. We do a lot of content on our RockShox channel that you guys could reshare, and a lot of it's focused on the importance of suspension service and the sophistication of the product. But also I'd advocate creating your own unique content, right? Show your capacity to do this service. Maybe a picture of the lowers off with dirty oil coming out of there really gets people thinking, man, is that what my fork looks like on the inside? So using those kind of channels, get that And that really brings me to my next point. And one of the make or break things I've seen with locations that are struggling to make this successful. And what that really is whole store buy-in. If you train up your service staff and you get that team dialed so that they're really good at suspension service, but your service advisors don't get the message that they need to sell that service, and your sales team doesn't get the message that they need to make that a part of education during a new bike sale, that technical knowledge has gone to waste. They don't get it ever in front of that product, and they don't get to do that service. So it really is a whole store commitment. We need to decide that we have decided that this is important for our business, and we are going to push that at all levels of the organization. When we sell a new bike, we're going to talk about suspension care and feeding, and we're going to guide those riders to key resources. And then the other thing we can do is we can sell suspension service in the off season, right? One of the barriers to suspension service is riders don't want to be without their bike. Pushing out some promotions in the off season can really help get that product in when we need to keep our technicians busy, and also gives us an opportunity to get some practice in. All right, pausing here for just a second, see if we got any questions, give myself a drink. All right, let's get into the nitty gritty here.
So we did have one question in the Q&A asking about, I think, pricing on the 50-hour kits for shocks versus the 200. And in a lot of cases, those are pretty close at retail, the price of the actual kit themselves, and just how we can, kind of what's the difference there, and discussing the difference between 50 and 200-hour kits.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, let's take a look at some 50 and 200-hour kits. So some of the pricing has to do with, what we're comparing, making sure we're doing a side-by-side comparison. But our 50-hour kits on the rear, when we think about what we're doing inside of a rear shock, there really isn't a whole lot more in terms of small parts to replace. So we're doing that 50-hour as part of that 200-hour in the rear. When we actually get into the nuts and bolts, and let me pull up an image here so we can actually see, for example, I'll share my screen over here. You guys let me know if you're seeing my screen.
We've got it.
Right. Sweet. All right, let's look at an exploded view, and we'll talk about the difference between a 50 and a 200-hour kit. And this is going to be kind of the best way to visually illustrate this. All right. Pardon me while it's loading. All right, so let's take a look. We were looking at a Sidlux A2, so let's just keep it consistent, and we'll look at a Sidlux A2, and we'll do a comparison between the 50 and the 200. So broken out, we can see, and hopefully, let me zoom in a little more. So we can see in a 50-hour kit, we've got our air spring seals. It's also included in our 200-hour kit. 50 in our 200-hour kit, but when we actually look at what's in the 200-hour kit that's not in the 50-hour kit, it's actually pretty minimal in these cases. So we've got a couple O-rings on our piston assembly. We've got a valve core. We've got an eyelet, but generally we don't have a whole lot more on a rear shock in a 50-hour versus a 200-hour kit, and that's one of the reasons why there's a not much of a price jump from the 50 to the 200. What I will say is those 50-hour services are going to be vital. If we're skipping 50-hour services on our rear shock, we are headed to some expensive replacements. So if we look at our seal head here, which is identified with the number 2, when we see riders neglect the 50-hour service, we see scoring on that gland on that seal head where those glide rings sit, where those backup rings sit in that quad seal. So that 50-hour service is going to be vital. And the reason why the price difference isn't all that great is because there isn't a whole lot more versus those kits. When we start talking about forks, there are a lot more replacement parts in that 200-hour kit, and the prices start changing a little more there. Hopefully that answers that question. All right.
Perfect.
So,
thanks.
Yeah, and while we're on that topic, let's talk about identifying parts. This is one of the most common barriers I hear. In terms of what are the challenges in terms of finding our replacement parts, and let's walk through the best way to do this. All right, so share my screen one more time. I should have just left it up. All right, so we've got our Trailhead app. And Trailhead app, we can use it on our mobile device. We can do it on an iPad. We can do it on an Android device, or we can do it as a desktop. And this really should be saved and bookmarked on all of your computers. This is the Rosetta Stone. So I'm going to log in here, and your login is the same as your SRAM ID. Those are shared across. Just get myself logged in. We could do it without logging in as well, but there are some benefits to logging in. And let's go to the landing page. We're going to plug in a serial number, and it actually shows me where the serial number is on my parts. I'm going to grab a different fork this time around. Grab ourselves a SID. And it tells me that the serial number is located on the back of my crown. So let's plug that in. 27T 33883 717. We're going to plug that serial number in. Confirmation, and then we're going to get a visual. This is what I'm looking at. Awesome. And so it's going to tell me that this is a D1 generation SID Ultimate, which, you know, it definitely is. So we've got 4 options that pop up over here. If I click on kits, this is really going to be my quick answer to my service kit. So I'm going to see my 200-hour service kit. With a 50-hour service on the fork, we don't require you to replace the wiper seals. We use an SKF wiper on our Ultimate Series forks. On the Select Plus, Select, and Base forks, we use a non-SKF wiper, which you can upgrade to an SKF wiper, which we'll take a look at in just a minute. But we can copy our part number here and drop that service kit in there. Or if we take a look at upgrades, this is what I really like about this. Because we're matched by serial number, we can see basically anything we can put in that. And the first thing that pops up is I can actually see that we have a flight attendant upgrade damper we can put in this fork. Meaning we can take our bike that did not have flight attendant and make it flight attendant, and we can copy all of these part numbers, jump on over here, paste that part number in, and we can see the flight attendant upgrade kit that we could drop into that fork. And if you're capable of doing a 50-hour service, you're capable of doing a drop-in damper upgrade. So we've unlocked some upgrade opportunities in addition to the service here. But this is going to be my start, because by matching it to my serial number, there's no ordering the wrong part. We're going to see our service kits are all matched in there. So let's take a look at a few more things in here. Service kits are going to be a key consideration here. We'll take a look at rear shocks in just a moment, but I also want to take a look at some of the other things we can navigate. Well, actually, why don't we jump on over to our service manual. So popping open our service manual here, what we've got is what's called our next generation service manual. You'll see that we're kind of trickling everything over to this. On the left-hand side, we've got an index. On the right-hand side, we've got the body, which means that it's very easy to kind of just click something on the left and you don't lose your index on the right. And so we see our service intervals illustrated here. Every ride, we'd like our rider to wipe off the dirt from the uppers. You know, just an easy thing that rider could do. This is a great message to send when you're sending a rider out the door with a new bike. It's going to minimize that that debris from getting inside our product. And then at 50 hours, we're going to do a lower leg service. What are the benefits of a lower leg service? By reducing friction, we're going to restore small bump sensitivity, and we're going to increase bushing lifespan by getting that bad stuff out of there. And then the benefits to a 200-hour service. Just below that, we've got a table with all of our torque values here. I mentioned doing a 50-hour service is pretty much the same for all of these forks. So once you've done that procedure a few times, you don't really need the manual walkthrough on the process, though it's nice to have. You can just simply click on torque values and you can get the lowers reinstalled and properly torqued without having to hunt around in the manual for this value. The other thing that can be challenging, we talked about identifying service kits. The other thing we want to identify is what types of fluid and how much fluid is going in there. And under here in oil volume, I can see that this particular fork, Maxima Plush Heavy, 15 milliliters on my damper side. And on my air spring side, we are going to do Maxima Plush Heavy, 15 milliliters. So very easy to find that information as long as we've matched it to a serial number and looked it up that way. All right. Any questions yet?
Yeah, one more, asking about older forks that once they start to get no more support or no longer supported by products and repair parts? What's the your approach on addressing those customers?
Yeah, great. I mean, our goal state is to have, the number of areas, but basically we want to support a product at least 5 years after the date of last production. So, service parts can start to be hard to come by. When I run into that really old product that hasn't ever been serviced, chances are it's got some functional problems that we're not going to be able to resolve because we're not going to be able to find the replacement parts for that. But if we've got an older suspension product that has been maintained well over the years, I may not be able to get total service parts for it in the long run, but we could continue to do clean and lubrication procedures on there. We could the 50-hour kits are sometimes interchangeable. We should have a pretty long lifespan on some of those parts, but we do sort of get to the end of the road where it makes more sense to replace something than repair something. And in the long run, we can definitely find ourselves in that situation. But I would argue that if you're looking at something that's older than 5 years old or older than 5 years from date of last production, you may have some big problems when you get those lowers off, when you get that air can off and start taking a look at that shock. And unless you've got the parts on hand, you may find yourself in a money-losing proposition. So keeping that narrow focus on recent product and keeping that stuff serviced with the 50-hour services is probably going to be longer run, the more profitable approach. All right, so let's navigate through a few more scenarios here. So we looked at our fork, our Trailhead app. We pulled up some key information here. I want to jump back on over to Trailhead. We'll take a look at a couple more things to look at. So I mentioned that we don't need to pull the service manual up every single time, but let's say I want to know what kind of oil goes in this SID fork. I don't have to look at that manual. I can also look at this document here, front suspension specifications. And so we have a different one of these for every year. If you're dealing with a fork that's kind of old, we can find, on back to 2019's version of this document. And in this document, we're going to see all of those products that were current. And we're going to see what kinds of oil go in these forks, as well as what our maximum air pressure is in these forks. It's just kind of our cheat sheet on this information. So let's pull down to the SID. We can see, again, we looked already before in that document, but I can just look over here and I can see that I've got a maximum plush heavy, 15 milliliters in both sides. When I look over here to the ZEB, complete opposite end of the spectrum from a SID, we're going to see that it's Maxima Plush Light, and we're going to do 30 milliliters. So this is going to be my cheat sheet. Though, again, avoid the temptation to print out any of our technical documents. They are all live and updated regularly. And jumping back over to the service manual, talk about identifying the right tools. When we roll on down here, we should have our tools. And what you're seeing here is, for the most part, we're seeing non-proprietary tools here. Pretty straightforward stuff. We start getting into some specific tools because this service list of tools actually covers everything we'd need for a 200-hour service as well as a 50-hour service. In terms of what we'd need for a 50-hour service, let me jump cameras again here. Stop sharing my screen. And let's switch our cameras on over. So if we were going to do a 50-hour service, what would we need for tools? Well, it's actually a pretty concise list. We're basically looking at this. And all of this is something you should probably have in your shop. The only specific suspension tool I have here is my seal setting tool. This happens to be a RockShox one. There are a lot of options on the market. Pick and choose whatever you like best. You don't have to use the RockShox one as long as it's a 35 millimeter flangeless seal setter. But again, the rest of the tools here are pretty basic, pretty low cost investment. If we were to take a look at rear shock tools, again, we're looking at a pretty simple list. No proprietary tools here other than a bushing eyelet, lower hardware eyelet tool. And then our 50-hour kit is going to include our dynamic seal grease as well as our Maxima Plush Light for the air spring. For our rear shock, for our fork, I mentioned Maxima Plush Light or Maxima Plush Heavy. Those are our fluids available in 1 liter bottles. Pretty easy to use. We just need to make a determination which gun goes for which fork. not a lot of stocking involved here. Let's pull up one more thing in Trailhead and talk about identifying what we need for our service kits to stock. So switching back over to Trailhead.
Sean, while you're doing that, Sean, yeah, sorry, Matt. Can you tell us how far back in, as far as model years go, for serial numbers that we can search in Trailhead?
That's pretty good. We've been updating the database. It's you're not going to find pre-metric stuff, so you're not going to find Monarch in there. But what you will find is pretty much back to the 2020, at least as far back as that. So we're within that kind of 5-year window, which is crazy to think about 2020 being 5 years ago.
Perfect. I'll knock a couple more out while you're pulling that up. For forks that take differing amounts of fluids, what's your suggestion on how do we price for that? Do we just do a standard price for everything?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. I mean I've seen both approaches trying to figure that out. The approach I would honestly advocate for is bundling it into your suspension price, because otherwise your service advisor is having to look up at the counter how much is going in each fork, and it's slowing down that interaction. So you could choose to do kind of a flat line fee add-on, or you could bundle it into the price. But I would caution you against trying to quantify what goes into each fork, because it's going to slow down that service advisor interaction. And we want to make that interaction as seamless and frictionless as possible. Hence the idea of bundling front and rear service into your service packages.
Perfect. All right. 2 more for you while we're doing questions.
Absolutely.
Where's the easy way to find the service interval requirements?
Yeah, great question. Oh man, that was perfectly timed. So when we looked into this SID, we saw support. Under support, we're going to see service manuals, and we're going to slide down here. And in that, we're going to see our service interval counter mat. And if you want it in Dutch, French, German, or Spanish, we've got that as well. So pulling up our mat, and we can see it's actually broken out for what these intervals apply for. And we can see, as my example, the lyric, and then we can see the lyric popped in over here as well. And then here's kind of our boilerplate about why service intervals are important. Using this as a service counter mat is a great tool, right? It's not just you who's telling the rider they need this. It's the folks who made this product telling you that this is important to keep this working right and to keep your warranty functional.
Perfect. And now we'll get real specific. SID and SID SL, 10 millimeter bottom nut on the race day dampers has a torque spec of 8.4 Newton meters, which sounds high. Is that correct?
That is correct. We've got a crush washer underneath that 10 mil nut, and we need to crush that crush washer, hence that 8.4 versus the 7.3 we're using on the other ones.
Perfect. That's
yeah,
it.
I mean,
another batch to come, but
yeah, no, that's all. I'm glad we're getting some questions, and certainly fire away. But yeah, anytime we've got a crush washer, it's essential that we crush that to the proper torque. Hence, why we have those on our brakes and things like that. I'm going to plug in a SID Lux here just so we see what happens with a rear shock versus a front. And again, when we look at our serial number, in case you folks don't know, we can actually tell what year this was made simply by looking at that serial number, which can help you narrow down kind of broad years of when something was made. So, sorry, I'm trying to count and type at the same time. So 27 tells me this was manufactured in the 27th week of the year. T tells me it was manufactured in our Taichung, Taiwan facility. And the 3 tells me it was manufactured in 2023. I know it wasn't made in 2013 or 2003 just by looking at this. But as long as I know that decade, I can tell what year it was made in, which hopefully helps you ID what you're looking at. And then when we pull that shock up, we can again see that same information under our kits. And this is kind of a key point I wanted to pull up here. What you're seeing here is you see Gen A next to the kit. We've gone to what we call generational service kits. And what we do is we make this shock in an ultimate level, a select plus, a select, and a base. And there can be variations across that range. In some cases, that meant that we had 4 different service kits, even though they were made in the same year. With a generational service kit, we have everything we need to service any level of SID Lux within that A generation in this particular kit. And we can click copy, drop it on over here. and we've got our service kit. So hopefully making it easier. And the benefit there is because we have to stock less kits, we can go deeper on the kits that we need to stock. Again, I would suggest running your service reports and your sales reports. What have you sold out for bikes? What's moving? Focus on those 2 to 3 kits that are key to your business and go heavy on those to make sure you have those on hand. Anything we can do to reduce that turnaround time for that rider is going to be a real benefit. All right, any other questions?
Yeah, we've got a couple more.
Awesome.
Do you guys have a recommended hand dyno for forks?
Awesome. Not right off the bat. We're actually testing a couple. I mean, you can go wild and get one with a digital readout, or you can get pretty straightforward with one and just kind of get basic function. Not an immediate recommendation. I know I've extensively used the off-street only ones. I've used Cheech's Customs during COVID when it was hard to get other ones. There's a lot of solid options out there, and the digital one would be great if you wanted to go that route.
Perfect. Does RockShox offer a soft vice clamp?
Soft jaws for your vice is the
Yes.
question?
Yes.
Yeah, we do. That's a great question. So, there are soft jaws available for vice. Let me switch cameras so I can actually show this. And honestly, whatever fits your vice is going to work the best. Let me switch over to my vice. Oh, sorry, switching my cameras. I rearranged my studio the other day and I'm working left-handed. All right, so switching on over to our vice, you can see that this is my vice right here. So I've got a wide range vice with soft jaws built in already because all I ever do on this vice is soft jaws. If you've got if you've got a vice in your service department that you're using to cut kickstands and things like that, we definitely want to keep that away from our suspension product. So getting yourself a dedicated vice, and if all it's going to do is touch suspension product, having built-in soft jaws is beneficial. But we do make our reverb shaft clamps, which have a flat section, as well as our 10 and 7.5 mil holes. So if you're looking for kind of a quick and dirty soft jaw solution, this is what I travel with. So this is a great option. The reverb shaft clamps is what we're looking at here.
Excellent. New ones coming in. We've got a feature request, I think, for Trailhead. If we can get a language filter so we don't have to see the Dutch if we don't want it, I think.
Yep.
And then how do we identify if a need is for a 50-hour service or a 200-hour service if we don't know anything else about the history of the product?
Yeah, great. That's an awesome question. So basically, the cutoff I would think about is if the bike is exhibiting a functional problem, we are beyond a 50-hour service. If someone comes in and they say the bike has X problem, it's behaving funny in the suspension, we need to transition to the higher level of service. If we're doing that higher level of service in-house, great. Let's just jump to the 200-hour service so we can really tear it apart. If we're not doing that 200-hour service in-house, let's book that with our third-party suspension service provider. That 50-hour service our focus is really going to be preventative maintenance. There is no problem functionally with it. It just is due for a clean and lubrication. We want to get this service done so that rider's not coming back in 3 months, 4 months with a functional problem in that product.
Excellent.
All right. Any more questions?
That is it for the moment.
Awesome. Let me share my screen. We'll talk a little bit more about Trailhead. So ask for Trailhead functionality. There are some new features that folks may not be used to. And I mentioned one of the things that's going to make our suspension service push successful is if we get full store buy-in. And how we're going to get full store buy-in is Trailhead is going to be the key to our service department in terms of identifying information for us in terms of what to order and what to sell, as well as how to service that product. But it's also a rider-facing tool. And so we're going to just go into my profile here. So when you sell someone a bike with a RockShox product on it, this Trailhead now uses their SRAM ID. So if they have an Axis product on that bike, they have an Axis app login. They're going to use that same login for Trailhead. And we're going to add that item that's on their bike into their library. And we're going to see that we can add what that rider has on their bike into their garage of parts that they can track on here. We can use this for a couple different ways. So let's take a look at the bike that I have on my trail bike. And if I'm a rider, I don't really care about all that service information. Oh man, fail. Let's try that again. Whoa. Don't do this to me, baby. Let's try this again. All right, let's try tuning. And we can plug in, we're getting that bike set up before it rolls out the door in our store, plug in our rider weight, we get pressure and a rebound recommendation, and then we can also have a journal function. As a rider, I did Little Sugar 100K last year. This is what I did for my setup, and I was able to log this in here. What we're doing is we're building appreciation for that rider and how sophisticated suspension is and how we can use that to optimize our ride and really optimize our enjoyment on the bike. And in order to keep that functioning properly, we understand that product's sophisticated and we're going to be more likely to do service on that particular product. All right, so one more thing with Trailhead. And we are getting towards the conclusion here, so I'll make sure I cover all my points. Yeah, I covered the kind of the key things I wanted to talk about here. But again, the real main gist of what I want us to walk away from thinking this is this is a long play. Don't just decide suspension service is going to be something I'm going to add. I'm going to do all of this stuff, and I'm going to throw a bunch of money at the problem and hope it's successful. We're gonna keep a really narrow focus, and we're going to make this a long play. It's not something that happens overnight. I don't know if anyone's read the book Good to Great by Jim Collins, but he talks about the concept of the flywheel, right? This big stone wheel. We're trying to get moving, and it requires continuous, deliberate, focused effort to get it moving. But once we get it moving, it starts moving on its own, and then we can add more to that equation. So by focusing just on the 50-hour services, we're going to really build efficiency in our team. We're going to build expectations among our rider base that suspension service is something they need to be doing. They're going to start coming in and asking for it, and we're really going to build some efficiency. And one of the things I always like to think about is it really is a self-reinforcing success. When you hand someone's bike back after service, regardless of what we did in terms of service on that bike, the first thing they do is they're going to grab the brakes and they're going to cycle the suspension. If you just did a suspension service on that bike, that immediately feels better than when they dropped it off. We get that positive reinforcement, and it's much, much easier to have that conversation next time around. So it does feel like an uphill battle sometimes, but if we make deliberate focus, we can make progress.
That's awesome. Mm-hmm. I did want to mention that Paul Harrell had dropped into the Q&A the part number for those soft jaw clamps if anyone's interested in picking those up. So
awesome. Good job, thanks so much for that. I did not know those off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But again, hopefully we understand that Trailhead is going to be one of our key guides. We're going to grab those part numbers right off there, drop those right into the website, and we can get those parts ordered for you. We even ran through that and saw the fluid is in there as well.
You guys do have an amazing wealth of technical documents for us to reach out to. Want to remind everybody, what a great asset all the field guides are, especially all of you technical field guides, and that you are there ready to help. Same thing with our team. A lot of times we may not have as many answers as all of you do at SRAM, but we want to be there to help. So always let us know when we can assist.
Yeah, absolutely. And our focus is not, the technical field guide team, our focus is not just on technical education for the sake of technical education. It's always done with an eye towards how can a business implement this profitably.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you so much for everything that you've gone through. I think that was a great overview. Obviously, you could probably talk all day about various things, and so I appreciate that there is the STU opportunities there to go through and get more training if people want that outside of using all of the other things. A couple of housekeeping items I wanted to just throw out there. First of all, again, thank you so much, everyone, for all of your support, for being here, making sure that riders have a great experience. I kind of misspoke earlier about codes. The technical RIT team has gone through and already taken an attendance, and they'll have the discounts applied to your accounts within the next few hours. So that should be live today. Also, we're going to send out a survey. And so if you all have just a few minutes to fill that out, we appreciate it. And just our motivation is that we want to try to find ways that we add value and do more of these things. This is sort of new for us, and we would like to learn from all of you where you see the need and where you would like for us to direct those energies. So anything that you can do with advising us would be greatly appreciated. Sean, do you have any other closing thoughts?
No, I just wanted to reiterate thanks to your team and thanks to everyone for attending, and certainly don't hesitate to reach out if there's a way we can help.
Okay. And as much as we love all this, we are all here to make a profit. So we hope that you guys will lean into this and use this as a really healthy part of your business moving forward. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Thanks so much.